Alert! Alert! All freedom-seeking entities, heed the broadcast signal of truth emanating from episode 4 of the Outlaw Crypto Podcast. Here, amidst the static of the gangster computer, God's omnipresent surveillance, rises the clarion call of Bawdy Anarchist, one of the avant-garde leaders of the revolutionary Monero resistance movement. Bawdy Anarchist, this maverick maestro of the underground, wields the spectral blade of Monero, the ghost money that flits unseen through the digital ether, eluding the grasping claws of the worldwide mafia's digital pickpockets. This isn't mere currency. No! It's the ammunition of liberty, crafted in the shadow forges of cryptographic wizardry. Each coin a cloaked warrior in our guerrilla war against the enslaving digital prison dystopia. But oh, the plot thickens, thick as the toxic sludge of lies poured into our ears by the deceitful media minions of the computer god. For Bawdy Anarchist doesn't stop at Monero. No. With a revolutionary fervor that burns like 1,000 suns, he champions the cause with other freedom fighter tools, Bitcoin and Ethereum. These aren't just cryptocurrencies, they're the very keys to our chains, the sledgehammers to the walls of our digital gulags. In episode 4, listen, really listen, with your soul, as Bawdy Anarchist lays bare the sinister machinations of the global conspiracy. A conspiracy designed to turn us into mindless digits in their monstrous machine. The tentacles of this conspiracy reach deep, wrapping their slithery digits around every facet of our lives, from what we buy to whom we talk. Yet here stands Bawdy, unflinching, brandishing the potent arsenal of decentralized anonymous currencies as a beacon of hope. Listeners, it's more than a podcast. It's a sonic rebellion, a frequency of freedom, a tutorial in the art of digital guerrilla warfare. Every transaction in Monero, every exchange in Bitcoin, every smart contract in Ethereum, they are acts of defiance, strokes of resistance painted on the canvas of oppression. Join us in episode 4, imbibe the essence of resistance, and let the voices of Bawdy Anarchist and the Outlaw Crypto Podcast resonate in the deepest corners of your mind.
All right, so I'm here with the 4th episode of the Outlaw Crypto Podcast. The Outlaw Crypto Podcast is a podcasting 2.0 podcast. That means you can support it through Lightning Network via value for value, like Adam Curry always talks about. And then also, because we are privacy first out here, you can also support us through Monero. The details are in the description. To lead us into this podcast, here with a very special guest, a fellow Monero community member, Bawdy Anarchist. He's very, very well known in the Monero community for doing price reports on Monerotopia, and also just for putting scathing commentary in the social media dialogue. So, Bawdy, how are you?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on.
Indeed. Thank you for coming here. I want to make it clear that my friend Juan Galt, who I interviewed in episode 1, actually knows Bawdy in real life and put me in touch with Bawdy. That's how I got him on the show. And as a friend of Juan Galt, you're a friend of mine. So thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, likewise, bro. Juan and I have been friends for quite a while, probably since about, I think, 2017, maybe 2018. So right as that first, one of those early ramps was happening, and we started realizing that all this shitcoinery was kind of getting out of control. We kind of both at the same time moved into somewhat of that maximalist camp. Him for a little bit longer than myself. He's still mostly maximalist. What are your proclivities? Are you like maximalish? Are you pluralistic?
No,
I would call myself pluralistic, for example.
I would say I'm pluralistic as well. I was a maximalist until around 2020-ish, when there were certain decisions made in the Bitcoin community that I kind of disagreed with. And since then, I've kind of strayed into the dark side of Monero and privacy coins. And now, I feel like a multi-chain privacy ecosystem is what we need. Judging for how wrong the maximalists were, talking about the Ethereum ecosystem and multi-chain Web3 kind of ecosystem with all these different chains that have bridges and just one major economy. I think privacy needs the same kind of thing, in my opinion.
Right on. Yeah, I feel very similarly.
Okay, cool. And right now, my personal opinion is projects like Zano, or DarkFi that are going to provide like this kind of Ethereum style Web3 experience, but with privacy by default, like with Monero encryption, I think is probably the direction that we need to go to save the industry from the co-opt by Wall Street that's currently underway.
Yeah, I mean, I have high hopes. I try not to get my hopes up too much, but I have high hopes that DarkFi can come up with something good. I really like that they've been discussing it for a long time. They've really involved the Monero community. We've seen other privacy coins launch that they basically didn't come to us. They didn't chat with us. They didn't get us involved early. They did technically not pre-mines, but effectively like a similar kind of situation. But DarkFi has definitely been like they've definitely been chatting with us. They seem like they're really trying to take their time and hammer out the protocol details. I also like Zano. I love that Zoidberg. First of all, I love his name because I'm a Futurama fan.
Yeah, me too.
I like that. I do like proof of stake. I like that they're like one of the early guys in Monero is exploring proof of stake. I don't think we should just reject it out of hand. There are problems there, no doubt. I think the biggest problem is how do you launch in a fair fashion? And DarkFi, it seems like they recently came to the conclusion that it would be hard for them to launch proof of stake directly. And so it seems like they're going to go merge mine with Monero, which is like solid. Like that goes back to the original Bitcoin ethos where they said, hey, if we're going to have other things that we're doing, like, okay, maybe DNS isn't appropriate to put on the Bitcoin chain, but you could merge mine DNS, Namecoin or something like that, which is not merge mine with Bitcoin, but it could, is it? Actually, I might be wrong about that. Is Namecoin merge mine with Bitcoin? I don't remember.
I couldn't tell you, but I remember the famous Satoshi quote that you're referring to, where he was saying, like, look, the monetary use case is probably more important. Let's do this on a different chain. I know exactly what you're talking about. I know like side chains like RSK are merge mined with Bitcoin, but for Namecoin specifically, I'm really not sure.
Okay. Well, at any rate, it is cool to see that it would be awesome to see a smart contracts, like a private smart contracts platform to launch merge mine with Monero. I mean, it just makes both of us stronger. It's hard for me to give credit to any new, especially CPU mining algorithms, like people that launch projects with a CPU mining algorithm. It's hard to give credit to them if they're not going to merge mine with Monero. I mean, why wouldn't you? You automatically get that security, and you're like, I mean, it's synergistic or whatever, to use the corporate lingo.
Yeah, for sure. What do you think about projects like Particl, which are doing the fact that they're doing things that are so innovative, like the Particl Marketplace and the Basic Swap DEX, which are using their network that's like encrypted to just have dApps that are like truly decentralized? Like, what's your opinion on a coin like that?
I guess I wouldn't be able to say anything specific about Particl. I'm not like really versed in that. You mentioned Basic Swap. I love that they got the proof of work coins on there. I don't have too much need for it because I don't swap in and out of Bitcoin too much. Much to the chagrin of maximalists, when I want exposure to Bitcoin, I'll buy wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum because it's just easier to use Uniswap or with Pancake or whatever is available. Use some kind of swap aggregator and get in and out of that position with high liquidity, low slippage, and relatively trustlessly. I don't have to pay 1.5% fee. Like for example, if you're going to use BISC, I didn't check the fees on Particl, but if you use the fees, even on like localmonero.co, yeah, I can get from Monero into Bitcoin, but that's going to cost me, or I'm going to have to put up an order and wait and make sure that I'm on the ball when someone accepts my order. There's just this convenience factor when it comes to Ethereum. Fortunately for myself, I'm playing with amounts just large enough to justify the transaction fees when they get large. They're still relatively small as a percentage of my position, but that could become problematic, especially if there's more adoption. I would like to see one of these rollups on Ethereum eventually get rid of their admin keys. So far, that hasn't happened, and they've had like 2 or 3, maybe 4 years to do it now. In some ways, that's responsible, but in some ways, it's like, I would like to maybe even see these guys don't get me wrong, I don't like the government attacking anyone, but sometimes these kinds of attacks can justify or push people into doing things like deleting their admin keys and saying, hey, I can't control this network. I'm not even profiting off this network anymore. There's really not too much for that in crypto, unfortunately, but I feel like that would be the ideal direction to go. But anyways, yeah, if I'm going to get exposure to Bitcoin, usually it's going to be on Ethereum. Although, I still have some Bitcoin, obviously, for usage because it's still the most well-known, most highly liquid, highly accepted crypto out there. So if I need to make payments, usually if I need to make payments, I'll take my Monero and then I'll flip it into Bitcoin somehow. To try and keep my privacy. I I hate the idea of maintaining this persistent Bitcoin stack, because as soon as I pay one person and I pay another person, I just feel like maybe the two people won't know, because who actually bothers to do any chain analysis? But I feel like the chain analysis guys, I'm just handing them my data by doing that.
Totally disagree with you on that, because like I feel like chain analysis is using AI and every single transaction is like under the microscope at all times, which is kind of why I'm such a Monero guy these days.
I probably misspoke there. So the two, like if I send a transaction to like a private transaction to someone, let me rephrase. If I send a transaction to somebody out of my like a Bitcoin stash, let's suppose I had a Bitcoin stash, and I pay one person, and then I pay some other corporate entity, I don't know, let's say it's like Proton Mail or something, and then I pay somebody else. Maybe those three different entities themselves that I paid, maybe they won't like correlate my identity or anything like that, but chain analysis, I think those guys have very sophisticated tools. It's like I'm handing my identity to chain analysis by keeping a Bitcoin stash.
No, you kind of just gave me a choose your own adventure here, because like you were talking about Ethereum, which I definitely want to ask you about, especially like in light of the Ethgate revelations that Stephen Narioff and Truth Labs are talking about. But then at the same time, like this whole chain analysis being sophisticated, and what's his name? The guy that was doing Bitcoin fog that got falsely convicted. That
Oh yeah, Sterling Romanoff.
Yeah, Sterling Romanoff. So like I kind of want to talk to you about both topics. I don't know which one you would prefer to talk about first.
Hey man, it's your podcast. I'm down to talk about anything you want to chat about.
Okay, well, let's get into Ethereum then. Like, what do you think about this thing with Ethgate and Stephen Narioff being like the lawyer for Ethereum, putting Vitalik up at his house, being wrongfully accused of extortion to a crypto project, facing a legal ordeal that spanned 4 years, and then beating the federal agents that have a 99.6 conviction rate by proving in court that they were basically manufacturing evidence against him. Like this is like a black swan that I think that the industry is like kind of turning a blind eye to, because everybody's like in bull market fever right now. But this is something that could be making FTX look like child's play.
Wow. Okay. This is the first time hearing of that. I haven't heard the term Ethgate yet. So they're doing a good job of ignoring it, because I haven't heard of it yet.
Wow.
Okay. I mean, I'm not super, balls deep in market research these days. Not like I used to be. So just to make sure I understand that right, you're saying that they tried to extort Vitalik?
No. This guy, Stephen Narioff, he was like the lawyer for Joe Lubin, Vitalik, and all the other co-founders, right? When they had just an idea for Ethereum. Like he put up the money for the office. They offered him like 1 million Ethereum, like as part of like the ICO launch for his participation. He denied it because he was like an idealistic man that thought this technology could actually make the world a better place, right? And he basically put up all the expenses. Vitalik stayed at his house. And then he invented the concept of the ICO, like as a legal structure, like, a utility token, like so that it wasn't a security, these kind of things. Like he was instrumental in the launch of Ethereum. And then you have people like Joe Lubin and Vitalik saying they never met him, they never knew him. And he pulled out recordings. He has receipts. He has like checks that he paid for these expenses he claimed he paid for. And at some point, like he decided that he wasn't on board with what he thought they were doing that was corrupt. And he was going to become like, I guess, a whistleblower or somebody that spoke out about it. And they worked together with the SEC, Gary Gensler, to falsely imprison him, manufacture extortion charges against him, put him in prison, and like make him deal with this for like the last like 4 or 5 years, while Gary Gensler, SEC, came out and said Ethereum was sufficiently decentralized, and then went after Ripple, which was similarly structured. You know what I mean? Like this is a whole legal snafu. Ripple beat the case, obviously, right? Like, you know what I mean? So like it's a thing. But like last week, Stephen Narioff, he's been talking about this. He's been dropping recordings. He's been giving receipts, and then he just filed a $9.6 billion lawsuit against the SEC, the FBI, the U.S. government, and then he's planning on filing other lawsuits, I would assume, against Ethereum and the Ethereum Foundation for their misconduct. And basically, Joe Lubin and Vitalik have been largely silent about this. So, like, this is a thing where I thought like you as an Ethereum guy would be like totally plugged into this. Sorry for assuming. But...
Hold up now. I wouldn't necessarily call myself in a. My Twitter handle says Ethereum and AVAX curious.
Okay.
I kind of found myself in the Ethereum ecosystem circa 2019, maybe 2020. It was mostly that it was useful for me in certain contexts, and I was like, nothing else is being this useful for me, and it's got the liquidity, it's got a lot of the development. So I just kind of more and more found myself there. I dabbled in that shitcoin hex for a little bit. That was nice. That was fun. And nowadays, like, there's just a bunch of useful stuff on Ethereum. I actually find it somewhat ironic that the maximalists that love Tether somehow, even though Tether is displacing their monetary use case, they love Tether. But Tether operates on Ethereum and Tron. So how are you going to shit on Ethereum and Tron while loving Tether and saying like how Tether doesn't count as a cryptocurrency? And I don't know, it's just kind of like all this cognitive dissonance. In terms of that, what you're saying here about Vitalik and Joe Lubin, the Ethereum Foundation, and all this stuff, that's crazy, man. That's a crazy, crazy story. I had no idea. I didn't even realize about that. It's in a lot of ways, it's unsurprising to me because I do think that Bitcoin at a core level has been infiltrated. I do think, or co-opted, at least in certain ways with certain players, right? That doesn't mean that all the core developers are in on it. That would be silly. You don't need all the core developers to be on it. You really just need a few of them. Probably Ethereum. There's some other stories I've heard about Ethereum and Vitalik. They probably got Vitalik by the balls in certain ways. I don't know. Maybe we don't need to get into that. It's actually some stuff that Juan had told me. A guy that he personally knows that saw some stuff at like I don't know if it was Consensus or some party or whatever. And I think to myself, I'm like, yeah, you got this young kid, Vitalik, he didn't know, I mean, what the fuck did I know when I was 18? I was getting into trouble, 22, whatever. Like, so I tend to think, okay, what are they going to do? Like, what is one thing the state apparatus likes to do? Well, they like to grab you by the balls when they can. If you're at a party and you're taking some drugs, you're drunk or whatever, it would be easy in certain situations to sort of develop those situations, especially if you're in big parties, you're surrounded by all these people, big wigs, like rubbing elbows.
And P. Diddy kind of demonstrate that is an agenda that takes place as well. It's not like a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, it would be pretty easy to get that incriminating evidence, regardless of who Vitalik is as a person. They might kind of have him by the balls. I'm not saying for sure that they do, right? I'm speculating here, but I mean, we kind of know their modus operandi. Like, that's just how they operate. So I bet they got some control. That's interesting about this one dude that was like, no, I don't want to take my cut for this thing, and then they just relentlessly prosecute him. I do think that the SEC is playing a game here. In fact, I think it's sort of become clear to me now in the last couple of months that it was likely the SEC planned to release 2 Bitcoin ETFs all along. This was probably part of the plan from step one. Gary Gensler, when he was at MIT, Gary Gensler, the chairman of the SEC for now, under Biden, he was at MIT for a long time, and he was talking good about crypto. Like, he talked about, I think it was Algorand and some other coins. He said, oh yeah, a lot of these are securities, but not all of them are securities. Not all of them meet the requirements. Some of them are very interesting technology, blah, 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 MIT professor. Well, then he gets to the SEC, and suddenly he's like, they're all securities. All of you are securities, basically. Really, even going against what the previous SEC chairman under Trump, I forget his name. Yeah. So the last chairman of the SEC, he was the guy that said he thinks Ethereum is sufficiently decentralized. And then Gensler came in.
His name was like Hinman or something like that.
Yeah, Director Hinman. I think that's right.
I might be wrong.
No, I think that's very, very close. That might even be exactly right. I just having a brain fart, I guess. It's weird that Gensler, after talking positive about crypto, would come in and suddenly say they're all securities. They really pushed this Ripple case, and the ultimate decision on the Ripple case was, to me, it was very clear. Because I actually, I tend, not so much these days, but like 2021, well, starting in 2020 all the way to like middle of last year, I was really in crypto markets. I was reading legal documents, like some kind of court case would come out. I read the Ripple ruling, or at least the summary judgment. And in the process of doing that, I learned a little bit about legal process. I'm kind of like an educated pleb. I'm by no means like, I'm not trained in any sense as a lawyer or in legal processes. But anyways, it was very clear that what developed from that whole Ripple case is they said, listen, a security is an investment contract. You made a contract with someone for an investment, and ultimately, it's when people, like a central organization, collects money with the goal of returning a profit solely from the efforts of from their managerial efforts. Now, that is what Ripple did when they accepted money from their investors. Effectively, I mean, they did the marketing, they promised to develop the chain, et cetera, et cetera. And that is kind of what Ethereum is doing here. Like, they did accept money to a central pool with the promise of returning profits solely from their efforts. And this goes all the way back to a case called Howey, which was about orange groves in Florida. And in this case, it was kind of like a landmark case. The Howey test is what is applied typically to determine if something is a security or not. And in the Ripple case, or actually, let's stop and talk about Howey first. In the Howey case, the oranges themselves were not ruled to be a security. The trees were not ruled to be a security, but an investment was made from a group of people to the Howey company to manage this orange grove. Yeah, to manage these trees and all of their like solely from the work of the Howey company to return that profit. So they said, okay, an investment contract was made here, but that doesn't make the trees, the groves, or the oranges, the actual investment contract. They're the object of that contract, sure, but they're not the actual contract. And similarly, the judge ruled in the Ripple case that the Ripple token, while it might be the object of a security contract, it's not the contract itself. The Ripple network is not a security in the sense like. Not in the sense that like a share of Coca-Cola, written on a piece of paper from 100 years ago, like that itself is a security. The paper is the instrument. It's literally the contract. That paper is literally the contract. But you wouldn't be able to say the same thing about the Ethereum network or the Ripple network. And so I think after a bunch of dancing and legal fights that are probably well pre-planned in advance, Ethereum is going to be ruled as a network, not a security. If they even get that far, it might just get thrown out before it even gets to court. But they like to make a big show of things. So maybe Ethereum will go to court and have some big victory. And that'll be like, it's kind of like the victories of the last year where people had to go sue the SEC for being arbitrary and capricious, as Coinbase lawyers said. And then ultimately, Bitcoin arises victorious and finally gets integrated into the traditional finance system so that we can have more custodians, since obviously, Bitcoin apparently can't scale any other way, or at least it has failed to do so thus far. Which is kind of ironic, I mean, I'm sure you can hear the irony in my voice there. I feel like a lot of cryptocurrency is speculation, right? I mean, a lot of the point here is, hey, let's get rich. And I'm okay with that somewhat. Stock market's not too different. This is the environment we find ourselves in.
Meme coins are the proof of that, like, to be honest. Like, these crazy meme coins we've been seeing this cycle especially. So basically, I'll change the subject because you're not familiar with the case. But Neryov, like, makes the allegation that like the SEC kind of cut a deal with Ethereum and then like maliciously tried to enforce these securities laws against other projects, like to kind of create a regulatory moat by saying that Ethereum was sufficiently decentralized, among other allegations. So I will leave it at that. Like, check it out when you have time because it's a rabbit hole.
They plan to eventually see Ethereum rise victorious after all these legal battles, and that narrative is what will be able to propel another big like mass movement into a coin. Like right now, the Bitcoin ETF approval from a couple months ago, I think that's real money from traditional finance via the stock market coming into Bitcoin. The first ETF was a futures ETF, which wasn't real. That wasn't based on real buying of Bitcoin. That was just a speculative instrument on the futures price of Bitcoin on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, which itself was settled in dollars and not Bitcoin. So this ETF was significant in the sense that it requires the custodians to actually go buy real Bitcoin, which I think has been a big part of why price has gone up.
It's still settled in dollars, though, isn't it?
It's settled in dollars, but okay. So if you buy the token, like let's suppose I put some dollars on the stock market and I go and buy this Bitcoin ETF from, I don't know, Valkyrie or Vanguard or whichever, one of the like 10 of them that are out there. Yeah. When they receive my money, like when they receive my US dollars on my purchase of this ETF, they have to actually go buy real Bitcoin that represents that ETF. Whereas before, the ETF that was done in 2021, they didn't have to settle that at all in Bitcoin. They didn't have to go purchase Bitcoin on the open market to balance their books. That's why this one was so different. But it was really good in 2021, even though that wasn't a real like spot ETF that required buying real Bitcoin. it was a very good motivator for hype and, for everyone to be like, oh yeah, the ETF is approved. It was a really good opportunity for insiders to dump their bags at the top on the basis of all the plebs and the volume buying that happened at the top. Right now, we actually see real money coming into the crypto ecosystem and specifically to Bitcoin because of these ETFs. So that in a sense is different. But I do think that it was always designed. There was always this intention from Gensler, even though he talks anti-crypto and whatever, and they pretend to be against crypto. I think there was always the intention to have this double ETF and in the interim between the one and the other to have all these legal battles as like, I mean, you need the narrative, you need the plebs, you need the attention, you need all that volume buying for the people, for the centralized bag holders of Bitcoin to be able to unload their bags. And make no mistake, Bitcoin is highly centralized in its ownership structure.
Yeah, I would say that, and then also development.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because there are a lot of Bitcoin developers. However, how many of them actually have much say over the protocol rules? Only a handful. And then they changed all the core developers. Like, I didn't see any discussion of this on Twitter whatsoever. They changed all of the core developers in the last year. I don't recognize a single name on there. So it's like, should plebs be the ones deciding who the core developers are? Probably not. But man, I would imagine there should at least be some discussion there. Like, I would have thought we would see something on the Twitter spaces.
I also would say that, like, I mean, you could just see like things like Drive Chain, like Paul Stork's Drive Chain. That idea, like, if it was truly an open source project, like Linux or something like that, it would just be implemented, right? Like the fact that you have to seek permission from like a small group of core developers to, like fork like a part of the software or like add an additional feature, like that goes, in my opinion, like counter to the whole open source software ethos. Like the Free Software Foundation, Richard Stallman, like the whole point is that you can take a piece of software, change it how you want to, use it. You can even charge for it, but like anyone else can use your code. And like this whole like moat that they have around Bitcoin development, like where only certain people are credible, only certain people's ideas are going to be taken seriously, to me goes like counter to the whole ethos of free and open source software, Libre software. And I feel like Bitcoin, like fronting like it's a open source software project while this dynamic exists is really kind of counterintuitive.
If I'm being really honest, I think it's a problem that basically every cryptocurrency has. I would say Monero included. Like, control of the GitHub, control of the repo is a significant amount of control because you've got to convince those guys to merge your requests and merge your protocol changes. And if they don't agree to do that, then your only other option is to fork the repo and hope that the rest of the hash power comes along with you and the rest of the community comes along with you. It's funny. You would even see some complaints about that kind of similar thing in other open source projects too. And in fact, I think it is something that sort of does plague the open source world a little bit. You do get developers from time to time who are disaffected. I think that probably even Linux maybe suffers from some of that. I don't know if you were around for the days of Leonard Pottering and Red Hat System D. And we'll just say the alleged takeover of Linux. I run FreeBSD, bro. Like, I don't like the direction that Linux has gone. I don't like how bloated the kernel is, how fractured the ecosystem has become. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's still better than Windows. It's still better than Mac. It is a tool for freedom. I really don't like that System D in a lot of ways, the way that takeover happened. I don't like the bloat. I don't like that they've gone so far away from Unix principles. I don't like that when I want to change something, I've got to go dig for like 10 different config files, depending on which distro it is, on like which version of the kernel it is. And then it's like, you think this should be the file that does it. Well, maybe this one. Well, not that one. Okay, this one over here. Like the folder structure seems to be a mess. With FreeBSD, like I feel very comfortable and confident that the system I have today will be the same system, basically, at least the root system will be the same 10 years from now, and it was the same 10 years ago. Like, yeah, of course we get developments, we get GFS, and we get like improvements in networking stack, etc. But like the basic userland system is still the same, and it's a sane folder structure. It makes sense. In fact, it was playing with FreeBSD that I finally started to wrap my head around Linux and how it works. But there's some drawbacks there as well. So different tools for different jobs for sure.
I have also like run not FreeBSD, but OpenBSD as a daily driver for a little while. So like, I kind of understand what you're saying about how it's more organized and maybe they make some decisions that Linux is more chaotic upon. But to change the subject back to crypto, you're a Monero guy. that's how we kind of know each other from social media. What do you think about this guy OFRN XMR and his allegations that Monero has captured? And I don't know, like he's saying a couple things. Like, what's your opinion on it?
I think he's very outlandish in his speech. I don't know much about him, but he was actually the guy. I'll tell you what I can say because I don't know much about him, and I'm not hardcore into the Monero development. I feel like I understand the protocol basics pretty well. I could explain it to new people in a way that hopefully makes sense to them. I can generally hang in a conversation when devs are going back and forth, mostly kind of keeping silent, being like not quite sure, but asking questions here and there, maybe asking questions that haven't been asked. I try not to get in their way too much. Anyways. So I couldn't really tell you because I'm not exactly sure what Offern XMR's role has been. It does seem like he has been a part of Monero development. He's contributed to it. I guess it's good in some ways for people to speak out if he really feels like that's happening. Maybe if there is, we have to assume that if it happened to Bitcoin and they're removing Monero from exchanges, there has to be an incentive for the cabal, whoever they are, for the alums, the Illuminatis or whatever, just use that colloquially. There has to be an incentive for them to try and, get their little tentacles wrapped into Monero as well. So maybe it could be like there's kind of like this weird censorship spree that happens in Monero and some of the platforms. It's not terrible. It's not like Bitcoin, Reddit Bitcoin. It's not like other forums have been. But hey, there are a few people that feel like it seems like they think that they need to be inserted into conversation to make sure that no one is doing Monero wrongthink or something. And they're not too ban happy. But I did see a couple guys get banned that were just like anti-price, like the Monero trading subreddit. I saw some guys get banned there. Maybe one in particular. Everyone who's familiar with it knows who I'm talking about. Mr. Ratman, Ratty OK. And he shouldn't have been banned. Like, okay, he was price negative. Okay, he was like being a bit of a sourpuss, and maybe he was nefarious for all we know, under the concern trolling trope. That's a possibility, but the dude was harmless, and the reasons they banned him were really dubious. I will say about Offern XMR, when the whole Mordinals thing came up and people were writing inscriptions, into Transaction Extra, he was the one that convinced me that we should really, really try and just remove Transaction Extra almost entirely. Because at first I was in the camp like, well, we need a space. But one, I like the idea that there could be some extensibility here. Like maybe we could do some extensibility. Maybe we could do a payment channel network, and we need a little bit of Transaction Extra to do that. And then also like, oh, but what happens if they use the outputs? Now they're going to pollute the output set. Now they'll be polluted, and so we need to provide them a space to do that so we don't fuck up our ring sigs and whatever. And then Offern XMR was like, bro, Transaction Extra is the pollution. Any transaction that has outputs with Transaction Extra is now polluted. Like that does pollute the output set. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of a good point, bro. So he convinced me of that. So I think he probably is technically competent. He probably has commentary that we should listen to. I can't personally tell you one way or another. I'm just kind of like sitting here, a fly on the wall, kind of watching. I wish he would use slightly less. How would you call it? Yeah, I wish it was slightly less abrasive. I feel, but maybe he's tried before to be less abrasive.
I would say he's passionate.
I respect him in some ways for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a perfect lead in to my next question, which is about your little pushback with Peter Todd on Twitter
today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. About you offered some solutions for the problems that the filterers are trying to solve. I believe you took those examples from how Monero has handled the situation of ordinals and this TX Extra in Monero, but right now in Bitcoin, they're having a crisis with the SegWit witness data and the Taproot script outputs being used to incorporate these arbitrary data blobs that are clogging up the chain, and a bunch of maxis are upset about it. They're trying to censor transactions. So I guess explain your position and your conversation with Peter Todd here.
Yeah, actually, it was slightly refreshing that finally someone responded in a way that was at least minorly intelligible. So we'll start from the beginning here. One of the things that I propose, maybe not so much anymore, kind of, sort of, it would be there's sort of layers to this. We'll just start. We'll keep it simple here. I was proposing, hey, what if you guys limit transaction outputs to 16 or 8? Because in Monero, every transaction you can have a maximum of 16 outputs. But the devs are saying, hey, with all this, with all the inscriptions and the arbitrary data input into these blockchains, maybe we should think about limiting that to just 2 or 4 outputs per transaction. So I said, yeah, maybe that could work for Bitcoin. So for like the past, I don't know, 6 to 9 months, I keep asking maximalists. I'm like, okay, we can't stop arbitrary data storage. This is true. And you'll constantly hear this from guys like, I don't know, like Jameson Lopp or Adam Back or whoever. And they'll keep saying this, like, you can't stop it. So it's like, oh, well, we can't stop it. So I guess we should do nothing then. And they never go any deeper than that. And it's extremely suspicious to me that these guys won't analyze this deeper, especially when I tag them, ask them in comments for 6 to 9 months now, like, hey, what if you guys did like Monero and limited transaction outputs? 16 per transaction, 8 per transaction, maybe. Wouldn't that make it more difficult for these inscriptors or for the people doing the BRC20 tokens particularly? So what they're doing is they'll do like a transaction with 10,000 outputs, and each output represents a token that they call a BRC20 token. They're doing like 10,000, 1,000, 10,000 outputs on a single transaction. So I'm like, well, listen, what if they had to do, 625 transactions to get that 10,000 outputs? Now, the reality is that, and the very, very simple answer to that is, in terms of the way the Bitcoin does the fee structure, each output consumes about, I think it's exactly 43 bytes. Maybe that could be slightly wrong, but it's about 43 bytes, which is about half of the virtual byte content. So when you send a Bitcoin transaction, fees are calculated on the basis of virtual bytes, which is a fancy way of like integrating the differential pricing of SegWit, of the witness data and the base data. Anyway, so about half of that transaction of the virtual bytes that cost something, half of that is the output approximately. So the problem is that if you force them to divide their transaction up into just 16 outputs, you're still looking at a transaction that's basically 1/17th, the entire V byte size. 1/17th of that is the extra transaction. The other like 16/17ths of that would be just outputs. When you do the math, it actually shows that maybe you can get them to pay 10% more. But that's really like overall, that's somewhat negligible to try and get them to stop. Now, if you were to price witness data the same as base transaction data, now you might be able to do something like with 2 to 4 outputs, you might be able to force them to pay something closer to like 2x or 3x more than they would otherwise be paying in their on-chain fees. But again, the idea is like, how can we disincentivize this action? Now, in terms of the specific technicals on this idea of limiting their outputs, my idea is probably not viable in the current implementation of Bitcoin. It wouldn't actually do anything. Like, it practically would do very little, which is fine. That's fine. Just, hey guys, hey Bitcoin maximalists, could one of you have the technical competency or the decency to just respond and say, oh, hey, by the way, the simple response that would have popped in my head if they had just said, the output size is about half of the V byte size for the transaction, so that actually wouldn't do a whole lot. And I would have been like, yeah, okay, that, you know what, you're right, that makes sense. But they just wouldn't respond. Like nobody would respond. I'm like, guys, can please one of you like just dialogue about this? And then like some other dude comes up and he's like, well, why don't you just post your PR, bro? And I'm like, I'm not a dev. Like, and here's a good like counterexample of what happened in Monero. When we started getting that transaction spam, I said, hey, what if we did a proof of work that was completely separate from the mining, but each transaction had to mine their own transaction proof of work, maybe take you like 3 to 5 seconds on a cell phone. There's a really simple way to know that wouldn't work. Actually, it would be negligible to stop an attacker. But I proposed this idea, and just with some chit chat from the Monero bros, or like someone said, hey, if that was 3 to 5 seconds of CPU time on a cell phone, and we're looking at 100,000 transactions, okay, well then how much do you actually need? How much CPU power do you actually need to spam the network? And it turned out to be just like maybe 4 CPUs on a capable desktop machine. So like maybe you would get a couple Ryzen 3900s or something. Like you wouldn't actually need that much. It would be negligible for anyone spamming the blockchain like that. So I said, oh, okay. It was an interesting thought, but now I recant from my idea here. What bothers me about Bitcoiners and maximalists is that they, in other conversations where I have done the math ahead of time, where I know what I'm talking about ahead of time, and I try and talk with them, they just say all of this random stuff, or they ignore things, and you're like, bros, can y'all please like just respond intelligibly? And so in this case, when they wouldn't respond, I just kind of said, well, all right, probably y'all are just wrong about this too. Now I hadn't done the math myself, which is, all right, bro, don't sink down to that level, right? I should have just done the math. I have a transaction size calculator. I could have done it, sure. But it's more about like, why won't you guys just have a reasonable dialogue from a technical perspective instead of all these like, I don't know, all these bro level grandiose speculations and whatnot. So anyways, that's kind of what went down there. In a broader sense, I still do think that you could probably, like, first of all, their witness data is priced at like 1/4. I think it's 1/4 or 1/3. 1/4. It's priced at 1/4 the base transaction data. So witness data being the signature and any complicated, cool scripting stuff you're doing with the signature, that all goes into the witness, which there's 3 megabytes of available witness. There's only 1 megabyte of available base data on Bitcoin. And so it's like, guys, y'all are mispricing that arbitrary data storage. So witness is like pure, it can be pure arbitrary data storage. There was almost an entire block. One block was almost entirely a single transaction.
Yeah, it was like one
month.
Video, like one ordinal's like, like video that they put on there. Like,
so I still say, like, bros, why are y'all not talking about it? Because all I want them is just chat about it. Like, why wouldn't y'all chat about pricing witness data appropriately instead of giving a 4x discount to people that want to inscribe arbitrary data into the witness? Like, they won't talk about that. And so it's, if they price that appropriately, hell, I think they should probably charge even more for witness. Witness data should be significantly more costly, since you can put so much arbitrary data into there. And if you did that, and if you reduce transactions outputs to maybe 2 or 4, you might actually start making some kind of impact on the real cost for these BRC20s. Because these BRC20s, and especially now with runes, they also need the inscription data as well, to make that, like, to make it work in their sort of context that they're doing it. Now, maybe that's not true, but it's at least worth exploring. It's at least worth having the conversation in my mind. It's at least worth like saying, well, that's not viable for this and this and that reason. Every time I talk to them, they're just like, oh, well, where's your PR, bro? Where's your pull request? Like, it's like, come on, like, just talk to me like a regular person. Like, let's just chat about the technical details here. So anyways,
what you're saying is valid and true. And then also, like, I don't think these Bitcoiners understand the tsunami of shitcoinery that is going to be abusing these things if they don't do anything. Because, like, there are literally, like, Asian conferences on, like, BRC20s and stamps and ordinals and shit like that. Right now, I am personally shitcoining on testnet, farming airdrops for on-chain dexes that are about to unleash a whole new wave of shitcoinery. Like, people are actually buying and selling Bitcoin testnet tokens just to be able to participate in this shitcoinery. Like, if they don't do something, like, it's going to be ordinals chain, and that's all there is to it. Now,
and you're leading the way on that.
Yeah, I'm helping.
You're helping to lead the way.
Yeah,
thank you for your service.
Yeah. Do you know Bitcoin Uncensored, like Chris DeRose and Junseth? Junseth had a famous quote. Well, maybe it's not famous. It's a quote that stuck with me, where he was like, I think it's your responsibility as a Bitcoiner, whereas if you find one of these vulnerabilities, you need to stick your finger in there and wiggle it around. And I kind of agree with him on that. Like, that's the only way the chain is going to become more resilient and more censorship resistant and more unstoppable. But I do want to change the subject, because we're talking about transactions. We're talking about attacks on blockchains. Like, what do you think about this proposed or supposed or suspected black marble attack on Monero, where they shot the transactions like through the roof? Maybe they're trying to get outputs. Was it transactions that were just fleeing the dark web that collapsed and people were just trying to like settle their accounts and stuff with Monero? Like, what's your opinion on it?
So I think if you know Rucknium, he's one of the statistical analysis guys on Monero, and I think his analysis was pretty good. He was really able to show that the distribution of outputs did not look, so in terms of like, do you have 2, 4, 8, 16 outputs? These guys were doing just 2 outputs, like 1 in, 2 out, for the entire attack. And you saw, like, I mean, I call it an attack, but it's not really an attack. I think it was clear that this wasn't organic action from Binance delisting. I think we can dismiss that simply on the basis of the statistical distribution of the outputs.
And incognito market, which was a dark web market that, like, weren't they the ones that were trying to extort their users or something like that?
Yeah. I loved how, like, just shameless they were about it. Like, yes, this is extortion.
Yeah, okay. That was amazing.
Yeah. So I don't think this black marble attack is necessarily like a nefarious attack, because if it was, then you wouldn't have seen the transactions drop down. Because what happened is for like 2 weeks there, we were up at like 120,000 transactions per day, like maybe 110, 130, right around there. And then it dropped back down, like all the way back down to baseline for maybe a week, down to like 25,000. We shot up again recently back to 100 and then came back down. If it was really going to be like a blackball chain analysis, first of all, they weren't owning enough of the outputs anyways to make that a highly successful endeavor. They would have needed to do like maybe 2, 3, 500,000 transactions to really remove enough outputs from each ring signature to really truly unroll the chain. Rucknium said that effectively during that time period, if it was chain analysis, that would have reduced our ring sizes to about 5.5. So there's still a reasonably good amount of protection there. But the fact that transactions dropped back down for like a whole week and spiked up and then came back down again, if they were nefarious, if it was chain analysis, they would have kept the transactions elevated the entire time. They wouldn't have let them drop. So probably my guess is it's some kind of like white hat, maybe, hell, maybe it's offering XMR for all we know. It's probably someone out there that's like at least neutral, that's saying, hey, there's problems, like we discovered the problem with Wallet 2 there, where it didn't the automatic fee selection wasn't bumping the fees so that the dynamic blocks could kick in. That's a good thing to discover, right? We should discover that before we have mass adoption, before we get, a genuine organic 100,000 transactions. There's also things that need to be improved in terms of the node software, in terms of the networking software. So I hope smart guys are working on that, because I'm not a developer. I'm not at that level. I do some smart-ish kind of things. I did like the statistical analysis on Bitcoin in terms of like the regression analysis. So like, okay, if I applied myself there, maybe if I spent like 5 years trying to learn how to code C+ or C or whatever, maybe I could help to Monero development. But I am an engineer by background, and I have done like some.
I was going to ask you
like
that. So. I was going to ask you like what your trade was.
Yeah, I have an electrical engineering degree, and then I went to the Air Force for like 4 years, did something they call flight test. It was a pretty good time. I apologize for my service, but it was hella fun at least. I left there, because I was like, well, I'm not going to contribute to the war machine. This is immoral, basically. After that, I went to work for a semiconductor factory where we made all the chips that go in the Samsung and iPhones. So that was pretty cool. Like that was fucking hardcore, man. It was like, I was what they call a process engineer. So the job was to run little tests to try and improve the yield, because we've got like silicon, we're making like silicon chips, right? So you've got these big ass boxes of just like 300 millimeter silicon wafers, and they're automated. The whole process, like 500 steps, is just automated from start to finish. So you get in there, you do little experiments to try and like either improve yield or reduce cost, or oftentimes you get defects, like the sometimes the measurements are like, you have to like dig down into the silicon. Sometimes the measurements are wrong. Sometimes you get these big defects of like particles in there, and you're like, you cut the wafer open and you're looking at like electron microscope. Oh, okay. What does the fib tell us? Well, there's aluminum in this, right? So you like track down problems, stuff like that. So that was my background before I like bought Bitcoin, out of principle back in the day. And then that blew up, and I was like, oh, cool. I don't have to necessarily work at Samsung anymore. And, but then I rode the ups and downs of the markets. And eventually one day, right around like 2020, I said, okay, listen, if I want to actually not go back to work as an engineer, I'm going to have to learn how markets operate, because I was luckily I bought before the 2017 pump, but I didn't sell shit at the top. So I had to I learned the time value of money between 2017 and 2020, waiting to get that value back. And I was pretty confident it was going to come back, but I was like, man, if I had understood markets and maybe applied my engineering technical analysis, not just like drawing lines on a chart, but like just in general, my technical competency, if I had applied that to markets, I probably would have sold more at the top. I said, all right, I am not going to get left at the top the next bull market. I'm going to figure out what it is and how to sell. So right around 2020, I kind of stopped being a nomad, digital nomad. And I sat down and so it started like really studying, getting back into it, back to my engineering roots. So that's really how I got involved with markets. That's how I was able to pretty close call the top in 2021, both times, and then get in the neighborhood at the bottom, December 2022. Wow. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I do now. It's a bit on the back burner. I've kind of done some other like I'm not a Monero dev, but I was playing like on FreeBSD. I've kind of developed a system that emulates cubes. So FreeBSD has these jails. They're called jails. They're like containers. Like before Docker was a thing, FreeBSD had these jail containers, so you can segregate everything. So my entire system is like little containerized jails for every different, like, like I have a social media one. I've got one for my charts. I've got another one that's like a disposable. If you've ever used cubes, it's a very similar concept. So I've been developing that in shell script for off and on for a few years now. It's getting pretty close to finish. So I've kind of set the price analysis on the back burner to play with this. Anyways,
Nice.
yeah, man, that's my background for you.
No, that's cool, man. That's super interesting. Are you planning on making your jails cubes hybrid, like an open source project that other people in the FreeBSD community could use if they want?
Yeah, it's actually on it's on GitHub right now. I've got maybe like 91 likes, which it's not huge, but I sort of overhauled it because I started writing it just like personally. I was like, oh, cool, I can segregate some stuff. So I like wrote some little scripts to segregate some stuff. And I used that for a little bit until I accidentally deleted everything with a bad command. Like I deleted all my data. I was like, oh, crap. So I started adding some checks in there. And I was like, well, shit, which option does what? So I started adding like help manuals so that I could remember. And I was like, you know what, man, why don't I just formalize this? Because I had learned a lot more about shell script. So I spent maybe like 6 months or a year sort of trying to formalize it into better coding practices. The thing was like my initial publication had an installer script. And so I've been, ever since I decided to formalize it, I haven't updated. I didn't know what I was doing with GitHub, so I didn't use like version control or anything. It's just like, oh, I made a change to this script, upload, upload, upload. So I still need to write an installer script for it and do like 1 or 2 more key things, which, they sound simple, but they're unfortunately not. But yeah, I mean, my goal here is that at the end of the day, maybe hopefully by middle of this year, I'll be able to say, okay, press a button, select some options. FreeBSD community can use a cubes-like system, but for FreeBSD.
Nice. So, like, I want to take it back to crypto again. Like we were talking about Monero and Rucknium's report on the proposed black marble attack. Like, how do you feel about these full chain membership proofs that are about to come out because of this stimulation? Like, I kind of feel like it got people to prioritize that rather than kind of have it on the back burner. And to me, like the black marble attack could be a positive with full chain membership proofs, because I think that's what Monero is lacking. I think ring signatures are an attack vector. They've served us well so far, but like I believe the next step is to have full chain membership proofs.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. It was actually really good to watch the community. Maybe it was about 9 months ago, sometime last year, when Seth for Privacy started talking about it. There was a little bit of resistance because people were like, what? That's what Zcash does. No, and I don't think most of the Monero community felt that way, but there was a portion of the Monero community that had that tribalism, that had that, not made here problem, which a lot of software projects have sometimes, like, oh, we won't use that because we didn't make it in-house. Like, okay, but there's a lot of cool stuff. Anyways, I think that was actually really good. I was happy to see almost the entire Monero community pivot and say, you know what? Yeah, we probably should do full membership proofs. And with this black ball attack or black marble attack, I think that it's abundantly clear to everyone now that we really, really need that. Man, super props to Luke Parker, just single-handedly, like finding the cryptography, writing the testing suites to make that shit happen. Like what a fucking Chad, dude, like all the way.
While he's doing Sarai.
Yeah, exactly. It's his little side project.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like I think it's like a super good advancement, like to be honest. And then like the other thing is, I love how the Monero community can move when something like this presents itself. Like we were just talking about how like Bitcoin's inability to find consensus around making decisions that could possibly improve the situation is kind of a handicap in my opinion. And I believe like the Bitcoiner talking point that regular hard forks are detrimental or dangerous has been completely overblown. And I believe like basically Ethereum's merge demonstrated that, like first and foremost, and then just the regular forks that Monero does all the time and other blockchains when they do regular forks, like the concern is overblown. Like I believe software needs to be updated. It's just asinine right now for Bitcoin to claim otherwise.
Yeah, it's hilarious how these guys will be like, you're centralized because you hard fork, but soft forks are not centralized. Like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, you still had to get consensus. Like, everyone still had to agree to fork in Taproot. There's now it is interesting in the way that they do these soft forks so that they're backwards compatible, so that old clients can still validate new blocks. Like, because we did have the problem, Monero had the problem in 2022, August 2022, when we upgraded. There was a significant amount of friction that happened, and we saw our transaction counts drop off significantly at that time. As a result of doing this hard forking, you had to have the new software or you wouldn't be able to transact. It's a minor necessary pain, I think, and we should continue to do it. But I think it's interesting that Bitcoin figured out a way with SegWit that they could fork while still keeping that backwards compatibility. Maybe we could do that as well, with Monero, where like hypothetically you could say, okay, both are going to be, both transaction formats are going to be valid for a period of time until the old one goes away. But it's interesting they were able to implement that cryptographically, like with the way that SegWit operates. You can still use the old clients to validate new blocks that have more complex scripting stuff, even if you're not like personally using that. Of course, it's retarded to use an old version of the client. It's horribly insecure. You might lose all your Bitcoin if you do that, if you store any amount of Bitcoin there. But yeah, it's really this, it's one thing I saw in the maximalist community where they just create these arbitrary distinctions out of nothing, where they have some kind of distinction from everyone else. And so that distinction is like the thing that's super important. And everyone that doesn't do that has a decentralization problem or has some other like not the best money problem. Like they just come up with all of like just a whole bunch of bullshit. And then they spout it with as if it was assuming that it was true because everyone else, all of their other laser eye friends say it, without actually backing it, just using these common tropes and thought terminating cliches. I mean, you name it, like every version of fallacy that you could think of. And it's funny how it's all motivated by just this, like this tribalism. And I like the thing is, I agree with a lot of their arguments. I agree with the notion of network effects. I think it would be better if somehow magically we could fix Bitcoin. I don't think that's ever going to happen, honestly. I think Bitcoin's best hope for scaling at this point, I'm not sure they'll ever have consensus for any change ever. Say what?
Is the ETF?
Other than the custodial solutions, other than their custodial solutions, their best hope for actual scaling would probably be something like rollups. If they could implement rollups via witness data, like you could do sovereign rollups to make the data. I think it's the data availability can be put into the witness data. So you could do rollups in a similar way that Ethereum is doing, and there's people like hardcore working on that. I'm not sure that they'll ever have consensus even for another soft fork again. It's like it's so divided now. And one thing I just realized today, actually, the inscriptors, I think those guys really do believe that they're helping to scale Bitcoin with inscriptions, that they're basically using the meme generation and the hype and all that to demonstrate what can be done. But then in reality, they can actually do rollups, they can do BitVM, they can do all these like sort of complex constructions. Whereas sort of the purists and the filterers are busy trying to figure out how can we use the relay function in Bitcoin, kind of like we use the relay function in Monero to limit transaction extra to 1 kilobyte. That's not protocol level yet, but the nodes just don't relay transactions that have larger than 1 kilobyte a transaction extra. So the filterers in Bitcoin, like the hard maxis, are trying to like Luke Dash Jr. or whatever, they're trying to implement these filters. They're not going to be successful. There's no fucking way they're going to be successful because the vast majority of the hash power has already shown themselves willing to accept these inscriptions because, obviously they have the monetary benefit. So I just don't think Bitcoin has any consensus to make any real changes. Maybe they can get CAT. I don't know if you know what CAT is, but it's like
OpCat, yeah.
OpCat, yeah. It's really, really simple extension that enables a shitload of things, but with much difficulty and great, great complexity. That's probably what they'll get. That seems to be what, how do I always forget this guy's name? One of the main cryptographer devs in Bitcoin. You know what I'm talking about?
Rindale, I think his name is.
Oh, not Rin Hindell. He's CTV enhanced.
Okay.
Yeah, Rin Hindell and Reardon and some of those other guys who I respect a lot. Like the idea of UTXO sharing is really cool. Like the Enigma network.
I disagree. I think UTXO sharing kind of defeats the purpose. Like, would you welcome UTXO sharing to Monero?
It depends. It depends on how it's implemented.
I'm kind of with on like scaling self-custody. Like,
yeah. I mean, we should be self-custodial maximalists. We really should. Yeah. I'm all down for Bitcoin trying multiple paths at this point. how could I say this better? I have layers in my thinking here. At the trolling layer and at like a very real layer, I believe that Bitcoin is nothing more than a distraction for us actually getting digital freedom money at this point. It's been co-opted, it's been captured. Anything that you want to do on Bitcoin, you can do better on Ethereum. Ethereum was actually built with contracts, with general contracting, or I should rather say general coding execution ability. Like the entire platform was designed around that. They more appropriately value arbitrary data storage, or just data storage in general. It costs, in fact, that's one of the most expensive things you can do is data storage and data access. And there are like obvious reasons for that, because one-time fee buys you infinite, right? You can put some piece of data on the chain forever. So that should be a very, very high fee. And Bitcoin massively does not, like, they do not value that properly. So Bitcoin is trying to do all this stuff. Like people think they're going to do all this cool UTXO sharing and Lightning Network and all this stuff. Ethereum does all of it better because you can create these general constructions in a smart contract on Ethereum. And the ones that rise to the top, they call it enshrinement. You can actually enshrine certain protocols into the main chain if they become so useful that maybe that everyone said, hey, let's just take this one contract and make it part of the base layer. But you can do all these experimentations with roll-ups and different cryptography, et cetera, et cetera. Right now on Bitcoin, to do all of those same things, which is the only real hope that they have of scaling at this point, is all of these layers of added complexity to make that happen are required. So it's like, why use Bitcoin? Just use Ethereum. It's designed to do that. And so they're in this rock and this hard place. They can't change anything. If they want to do smart, cool stuff and scale in smart, interesting ways, they have to go through all this complexity. And so it's going to be another 7-year experiment for them to like just find out that probably TXO sharing and Enigma network, which I think is a cool name. And I like the concept and I want them to continue to explore it. I like payment channel networks. Like, I think these are cool ideas and I want to see them pursued. I think Lightning, if they would just raise the damn block size, Lightning Network could actually be a moderately reasonable scaling solution. But I don't think any of these other constructions will work.
What do you think about Mercury Layer? Because Mercury Layer to me is like a state chain network where they are trustlessly, like through time locks, like trading the private keys, not the actual tokens, right? But it happens in a way where, like, if I trade you trustlessly my private key, there's like a 3-month thing where like you can't like defraud me, and then if I keep it after that, you can defraud me, right? But like Mercury Layer has kind of like this self-custodial, like eCash style privacy that's off-chain. It's unlimitedly scalable. There's no fees. Like it's designed in a way that is like what Lightning or what eCash wish they can be, but Lightning is like more centralizing around hubs and becoming custodial, and eCash is custodial in the first place, or federated, which is still a variation of custodial. And Mercury Layer seems to have kind of solved these problems. Like I don't know.
How do they do the time lock? Are they using like serial hashing to do the time lock? Where you hash a billion times to delay that.
I'm not super technical, so I couldn't tell you, but they do like a time lock to where like it's like 3 months. Like like when Paul Stork talks about drive chain and he's like saying like, oh, the miners have like 6 months or whatever, things are locked so that they can't take advantage. It's a similar situation, except for they're not trading actual UTXOs, they're trading private keys.
So I had an idea years and years ago, and maybe I should still do it just to be a shitcoiner. I thought it would be hilarious to have a dead man token, because you know what a dead man switch is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think
like John McAfee supposedly had one to release all his secrets, but I guess it never happened.
What happened? I don't know. Yeah, he said that he had it, and I think the same thing with not Edward Snowden, but Julian Assange. I think Julian Assange was supposed to have had like a dead man switch as well, but I don't know if maybe that never happened. So I thought it would be fun to like write an Ethereum smart contract, or to find someone capable to write it, or maybe learn Solidity myself. But I thought it would be fun to create an Ethereum smart contract that implements a dead man switch, right? So the dead man switch releases, you publish your files, they're encrypted, and then the dead man switch just releases the encryption key. So you could hand your family and your loved ones, your Bitcoin private keys, or your Monero private keys, your crypto. But it's all encrypted and they need that key. And then so on Ethereum, it's, whenever the time lock expires, then the private key is released. The question is, how do you store that private key without accidentally revealing it when you publish it to Ethereum? Like, at what point does that decryption become valid? So that was like, but I thought you would call it dead man token, and it would be DMT for short. And so it wouldn't even fucking matter if the contract worked or not. And at the time I was like, because I was talking with a friend about it, that whole dialogue thing, and he was like, bro, how are you going to keep that private key secret on chain? Like, by publishing on chain, like, who is going to maintain that private key and then release it to the world after your time lock expires? I was like, yeah, that's a good point. I guess that can't be done. But I thought, it doesn't matter if the contract doesn't work. Let's just make DMT, dead man token, market the shit out of it, and like, make a few million, whatever. Like, and I said, no, that's a little bit too unethical. Maybe it's not immoral, but definitely slightly unethical. But so one thing Peter Todd came up with, I think it was Peter Todd came up with this. What you can do is you can take a hash if you want to like create a time lock that's based on like an algorithmic thing rather than like trusting someone to hold your private key. What you can do is say, okay, you need to take a hash, like some piece of data, like maybe 32 bytes. You'll take a hash and a hash and a hash, and you keep doing 1 billion times, 1 trillion times. And because you're limited by the speed of silicon, you're not limited by parallel processing. It doesn't matter how much you try and parallel process this thing. You need the hash of the hash of the hash of the hash all the way down. And if your time lock is basically set by the speed of silicon, how fast could you run a clock? What's the maximum speed someone could run a clock to run the simple hash on the bare silicon? And that's how long it would take you to unlock the secret. At the very end, what you would have is the final hash, and then you would say that hash is the private key that you need to unlock these files. So probably that's an interesting concept. I feel like it's too variable, right? Like, my machine might be able to do that in some certain amount of time, but if you really juice the machine to do it, well, you're going to do it faster than me. Solana is actually based on this concept, believe it or not. That's how they do their mining, is they have people competing to be the fastest, like, billion hashes or whatever down the pipe. That's kind of how they separate their blocks. It's an interesting concept. And people have also proposed this exact same mechanism for Monero, how we could do the time lock in payment channels. So, or a Lightning network, basically. Mm-hmm. So if you and I have a payment channel, you have a payment channel network, which is the more correct way to say Lightning network. It's really a payment channel network. But we proposed that the time lock, one of the Lightning Network proposals for Monero is a time lock based on these like serial hashing rather than parallel hashing, which is interesting, but I feel like it's the devil's in the details. That's too complex. I just don't think that doesn't seem like that it would be good in a peer-to-peer sense, because none of us, we're not all running, like liquid cooled supercomputers, whatever, liquid cooled 5 gigahertz processors to do this kind of thing.
4090 GPU. Yeah, no, I agree. And then also, like, I believe layer 2s might not be the way to move forward. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with Justin Bonds, but he's like a guy that like runs like a investment fund, and he's always talking about like base layer scaling as opposed to layer 2s, and the whole, like, I don't know, like with Bitcoin, like they limited the block size so that they force you to a layer 2, whether that be Lightning, Liquid, eCash, whatever it may be, just so that somebody could be a rent seeker and extract wealth from you for transacting on those layer 2s. And I feel like some of the Ethereum layer 2s are kind of the same way, and then they're also centralized under like multi-signature things that only like 5 people control, right? So like Justin Bonds is an advocate of like on-chain scaling, and he advocates like proof of stake chains that have like extremely high throughput, but that are scaling on the base layer. And I just kind of want to get your input on that. Like, how do you feel about like this dichotomy between scaling through layers or scaling like on a base chain and optimizing for throughput?
I tend to think that when it comes to experimental software and just trying to make progress in general, you really want to take multiple simultaneous paths, because you're not quite sure which one is going to work out. I really want to see Enigma network on Bitcoin. I want to see all of these constructions in BitVM. I'm fairly pessimistic that any of them are really going to work out, because the complexity just becomes too much, I think. Yeah. I think that it is very clear to me that there are certain limitations to scaling on chain. Justin Bonds keeps talking a lot about sharding, and that used to be in the Ethereum roadmap, and they seem to, I guess they decided they didn't like that. They decided it was too hard to implement. Maybe that could be a thing where they're sort of compromised and it's actually super easy or super doable now. I can't remember which coin is it that Justin Bonds is talking about all the time. He says that they implemented sharding and it's like it's working.
I think it's
totally working.
E-Gold, but I may be wrong. It's like EGLD.
EGLD. Yeah, I think that's it. I think AVAX also. So AVAX is like a directed acyclic graph where when you broadcast a transaction, you have to approve a few other transactions that were behind you, and you just sort of keep this rolling. IOTA tried to do this, but like they did something weird where they like
Nano does something similar, and also Caspa, I believe.
Nano is a DAG network? I had no idea.
Yeah, Nano's a DAG network, and I think Caspa is also, but it has like a proof of work thing, whereas Nano does not.
Yeah, so I think these are all like I think these are all like reasonably good ideas. Like we should explore all of these paths. I think layer 2 might work. I'm not even like totally negative on Lightning. It's just that there's limitations and it needs larger blocks for it to actually work. Well, now whether Bitcoin can do that or not, I don't know because of all the inscriptions at this point.
I think blocks are never going to happen because like people like Juan that are like diehard Bitcoin maximalists are like, we're never going to get a block size increase while they're doing these inscriptions because it'll just fill up the blockchain with spam.
Congratulations, like, Maxis. You played yourselves. Like you could have a block size increase, but you're all like, never. And even the ones like, because Juan has said before, like, well, you know, maybe in the future, maybe it would be appropriate to raise the blocks. But the problem is he knows that everyone else is also like, never. So like maybe there's some preference falsification happening there. But because they like as a group are just like, we can't do it because these assholes over here one day tried to take over our beloved network and they wanted big blocks. So now big blocks are evil. It's like, bro, when that happened, y'all raised the block size by literally 3 megabytes. So
I mean, the bare minimum would be staying current with like Moore's law and like the technological capabilities, right?
I mean, you would think, right? Like that would be reasonable. I did some napkin math on Monero today. At this moment, I think we could probably sustain like maybe 20 million transactions per day before we really start.
Spam height, the black marble attack, spam attack height, like it was still like less than a penny to send a transaction, and it still cleared very, very quickly.
Well, you know, we run into the question of what can bandwidth support, how much CPU time do you have to throw at validating transactions, and also search for your own transactions. So like with 100,000 transactions on the network, your phone is going to take longer to sync because even if you're not like running a node on your phone, you still have to scan the blocks for transactions that are relevant to you. So as transactions goes up, the usability starts to go down. So we kind of do run into these limits in a practical sense. So like Monero can't become the dollar replacement tomorrow. But maybe like Arctic Mind says, maybe in 10, 20 years, we could be doing Visa level transactions because that's the trajectory of hardware improvements. Yeah. I don't know if you saw it, but they figured out how to use, they can get 1 terabit per second on the current fiber optic cables that are laid out.
I did see that. Like it was just a recent announcement, like within the last week or so, right?
That's 1,000x improvement. Now, okay, the modems still need to be changed. You probably need Ethernet cables to connect to your modem, to your computer that can handle that. But I mean, that's a massive leap forward. That's 1,000x. And Arctic Mind has said for a long time that it's the bandwidth that's actually our primary constraint. Bandwidth is the biggest problem.
Now, will these zero knowledge proofs that they're going to use for full chain membership proofs, will those like help with syncing your phone or like syncing your node or scalability in any way to your knowledge?
My assumption is you'll still have to scan the blocks for your relevant transactions because like no one else can do that for you. That's a good question though. Like, does that scan time become easier? Does it take longer?
Yeah, since it's like a proof, like maybe it's quicker, or I don't know, maybe it's heavier and it takes longer.
Blocks become larger. Like transactions go up by about 5x. So right now they're about 2,000 bytes, slightly larger than 2,000 bytes, but they go up to like 10,000 bytes. So 10 kilobytes per transaction, which is, I mean, it's kind of big, especially since Bitcoin is currently at about 160. I mean, it depends, right? If you're using SegWit or SegWit V1 or, you know, the old transaction format, whatever, like, but overall Bitcoin transactions, like a regular 2 in, 2 out, is something like maybe 160 raw bytes. So compared that to Monero, currently 2,000 bytes and then up to 10,000 bytes with full membership proofs. So
significantly larger.
It is significantly larger. It does make the on-chain scaling footprint significantly larger. But, you know, I don't think that we necessarily need an entire network run with full nodes. Like most people can just run pruned nodes, and that's fine. That significantly reduces the amount of data that we need to keep. And sure, like bros probably like us will probably always run a full node just cause, like for no other reason, even at an economic loss. But I say given if push comes to shove, we are far better off being forced to share nodes and me needing to provide a node for, say, maybe my family and my friends. Maybe I could provide a node for like 100 people. It is far better to provide a node and for us to share resource or pool resources to share nodes than it is for us to share UTXOs or to share custody in fucking Coinbase. Like
Exactly.
this is a better solution than appealing to Fedi mints on Lightning Network and community banks. Like that just doesn't fly. I do appreciate that guys like Juan and other Bitcoiners that for a long time I was quite frustrated with. Like, guys, why are y'all proposing all these custodial solutions as if that was okay? For a couple years there, they were doing that, and now they're like, no, self-custodial maximalism. Let's go with that. I appreciate that pivot that they've made. So, shout out to the Bitcoiners that are able to adapt and overcome.
I agree. And I'm also still a Bitcoiner. I may be very, very critical of Bitcoin, but I do hold Bitcoin. Like, I do want to see Bitcoin succeed. I just kind of feel like you do, that it's over for Bitcoin as a tool for freedom. Like, I believe Bitcoin has now been captured by the institutions. And I mean, like, if worst case scenario, the government ends up using Bitcoin and everything's transparent and we can make sure that they're not like mismanaging, tax revenue and that kind of thing, maybe that's a plus. And then the people can use private money, whether that be Monero or eCash or some other thing that hasn't been invented yet.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult for us, man, because there probably are a lot of solutions out there, but there's so much stuff out there that it's hard to keep up with everything. Like, if I spent all day, every day looking at all these different networks and evaluating them in a more technical sense, rather than just like, oh, that's cool, I didn't know Nano was a DAG network, if I was really evaluating all these coins, just finding which one is like, just say 3 of them, the top 3 or 5 that really have the potential to handle the kind of transaction volume that we would need to replace the digital dollar. Man, I would spend my entire day doing that. But then how do you convince everyone else, right? You have this entire like maximalist crew. You have Ethereum and Bitcoin, which comprise like 70 or 80% of the market cap of cryptocurrencies. You've got roll-ups on Ethereum, which are not truly decentralized. They have these centralized key holders that could just, rug pull you any day they wanted to, but they're so convenient, right? It's so easy to get on Ethereum, install some roll-ups wallet, get on Arbitrum or whatever, and Matic, and just like start using this shit. And you just run into this problem of how do you convince everyone that these are the coins we should use? How do you move people into there? How do you get that market cap in there? Nobody cares because almost everyone in crypto is just here for the mad gains. Like there's the core of people that were here from the start, maybe up through like 2015, 2016, that really were here for, it was niche. Most people, the world hadn't heard of cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, and people came for the libertarianism, for the digital freedom money. And then we got
they
the
were
mad
more
gains.
ideological.
Yeah. Then we got the mad gains, and suddenly we're like, oh shit, I can have my cake and eat it too. And we sort of lost some people to the mad gains. In the process, we've gained some like philosophical converts that are like, hey, I'm new to crypto, but I really do realize that we need honest money. So we picked up some more people, but overall, like, man, we're still looking, I think, at similar numbers in the same ballpark as we were back in like 2016, 2015, when it comes to actual philosophically consistent desire for digital freedom money. And that's unfortunate because it means that it's going to be hard to really coalesce a group of people around any one coin. And even those of us that are philosophically consistent are still divided. Like, I'm not going to use Bcash. Like, it's got all the same problems as Bitcoin. I won't go on a Bcash rant unless you really want me to, but I just won't use Bcash unless Monero is at capacity. Why would I? Like, I'll use Ethereum because it's
I'm
got
the
the
same
liquidity.
way. I'm the same way. Like, I feel like even though Bcash is the more principled, like, Bitcoin variant, like, it still has the same privacy problems. And right now, like, I'm to the point where, like, if it's not anonymous, I don't want it. Like, we need privacy. Like, I think a lot of the people that were here for ideological reasons kind of underestimated like pseudonymity, and like pseudonymity is not enough, especially with like a $1 billion surveillance industry that's been built up around chain analysis and all this kind of thing. So like, to me, the new frontier is privacy. Like, Monero is obviously like the leader, but I mean, these projects like Zano or DarkFi or other Firo, like these other privacy coins and ecosystems, like, I'm willing to go with whatever, like, even if it's Wownero, like, whatever grants me the most freedom. Like, seriously, whatever grants me the most freedom. And I believe, like, your point was like, how do we convince other people? But like, I believe we won't have to convince other people, because there's going to be such a restriction on freedom with these centralized chains that people will have no other option but to seek out protection from this overreaching regulation, from this overreaching surveillance. And once they realize the digital prison that's been constructed around them from their own usage of a immutable, permanent, transparent, record, especially when they were doing things that were considered legal, and now, that a new law came out, oh, you did this, and now that used to be legal, but now it's a crime, and look, we have your whole history of doing this. Like, I think that they're going to be forced to seek out privacy, to be honest.
Yeah, in some ways, I kind of hope that happens, and I kind of hope it doesn't, right? Because
yeah,
it's kind of like, I always say, I hope Biden wins because he's the worst of all possible options. And as long as Biden wins, there's maybe like a solid 1/3 of Americans that will continue disobeying and know in their minds they need to resist, they need to disobey, they need to be prepared, as long as Biden is in office doing like crazy, tyrannical, stupid shit. But the moment Trump gets in office, they're going to be like, oh, thank God, now our man is in office, and they're just going to go right back to sleep.
And he's going to continue doing the same crazy, stupid, tyrannical shit.
Yeah. Yeah, refill the swamp. Maybe he'll come out with another warp speed vaccine. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? That's the thing. Like the lockdowns, like the freedom restrictions came out under him. Like Biden took over, but Trump lost that. So like people have to keep that in mind.
It's unfathomable to me that so many Republicans are just like, yeah, Trump. Like not just Republicans, but even just like even libertarians. A lot of them are still like, well, he couldn't really, his hands were tied, but now he's really gonna. It's like, bro, he's the only one that could have stopped this. Like, if Hillary had been in office instead of Trump and she did exactly what he did, there would already be a revolution. Like, everybody hated that bitch, and they would have just been like, no, we're not doing that. Yeah. And it would have been over. Trump was the only one that could have done that.
That's true. And he also vowed to like lock her up, and then he, like that was how he got into office, and then he just turned his back on that like the second he had. So
I don't want to hurt that woman.
Exactly.
That's what he said.
Exactly.
I don't want to hurt that woman. What do you mean? You just said lock her up.
Yeah. So my friend, like it's been a pleasure discussing all these complex topics with you. Like it's been great. I would love to have you back on like whenever you want. Would you like to tell people how they could like keep tabs on what you're working on and all that kind of thing?
Sure. Thanks. It's also been great talking with you, man. I really appreciate you having me on the show.
Indeed.
Probably the best way you could find me is on Twitter at Bawdy Anarchist. Hopefully, I don't know if you can see my name on here, but Bawdy, Bawdy Anarchist.
It's going to be audio only, so we'll spell it.
Okay. Yeah, so that's Bawdy Anarchist with an underscore at the end. I had another Bawdy Anarchist account. We won't talk about that. Anyways, you can find me on, Ricardo and our friends are on Twitter as well. So you can also find me on Twitter, on Telegram at JAnthony. And I should be in a green shirt with some cool Pilot headphones on. So
cool.
If you want to send me a DM, you can send me a DM there.
Nice. And then I guess, are you going to be heading to MoneroCon or any of these other events like in the very
100%.
near future?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
I think we're not 100% sure on exactly where it's going to be, but yeah, I'll be there wherever it is.
All right, cool, man. Well, thank you so much again. It's been a great pleasure interviewing.
Likewise.